Hello everyone, this is Belle's Books, and we can be found online at abooks.com. First, I would like to thank everyone who has subscribed to my channel. It's really exciting to know that some of you enjoy books as much as I do. And I thought I would make my videos a bit shorter as they were tending to get a bit long, and I'll only do 5 books instead of 10. And the author I thought I would talk about this week is Ray Bradbury. The first book is Fahrenheit 451 by Ballantine Books. Now, this was published in 1953 and it recently sold for $4,000. Now, this book really expresses the mood of today's economy. Normally, a book like this in the past would have sold anywhere between $13,000 and $18,000. So it really says a lot that this book sold for $4,000. But collective cultural memory suggests that Fahrenheit 451 is about censoring books. It's mainly because of the plot elements involving book burning, the fact that memorization is treated as a sign of rebellion, and all the times Ray Bradbury himself talked about McCarthyism and how the burning of books in Nazi Germany inspired the story. However, this book inspired the Internet Code for Censorship. The code HTTP 451 appears when a web page cannot be accessed because it's blocked by a government order. This usually happens when websites appear to have copyright violations or they're deemed as threats to the national security. So the IETF, or the Internet Engineering Task Force, approved this addition to the HTTP protocol in 2015. So an HTTP error pays homage to Fahrenheit 451. It's a marvelous legacy for Bradbury. But he also managed to predict a fistful of technologies without even trying. Earbuds, Bluetooth, flat screens, FaceTime, drones, ATMs, they were all preconceived by him. Now, the only thing he didn't see coming was digital books. But he didn't want a digital book version of his novels to exist. He was intensely displeased with technology in general. In fact, well into his old age, he made a lot of, shall we say, reactionary statements about the internet, which really just demonstrated a basic lack of technological understanding. He regarded ebooks in particular as harmful, and he just couldn't stand for them to be in digital formats until 2011. By that time, he was 91 years old. But the story goes that Simon and Schuster basically threw money at him and said they couldn't do a deal in the 21st century without ebooks. So Bradbury finally agreed, but he did extract one last concession, and that would be that libraries would be allowed to get digital copies for free. Bradbury was inspired to actually write the story after being stopped by a police officer one night. When being questioned about what he was doing while walking, Bradbury said he was putting one foot in front of the other. The officer reacted with such hostility, and Bradbury became so upset that he put a packet of crackers in his mouth and sprayed the policeman with crumbs. So this confrontation inspired his short story, The Pedestrian, about state control and overreaching power, themes which he actually returned to in Fahrenheit 451. And as for the inspiration for the title of the book, Bradbury asked a scientist one day for a number. He liked the sound of it, and he just didn't care to do any additional research. The second book is The October Country by Ballantine Books. This was published in 1955, and it recently sold for $656.25. So Bradbury was, above all else, a short story writer. His first book was published in 1947 under the title Dark Carnival. And then 8 years later, when he cut, revised, and added to the collection, he made up his definitive tome, The October Country. So when given the chance to re-release his out-of-print works in '55, Bradbury seized the opportunity to revisit his first book and correct the things he thought were inadequate. He was, throughout his career, often unsettled with calling a book finished, even after its publication. He rewrote a number of stories, and discarded any he thought were too weak, violent, or primitive, were just not representative of where he was as a writer at that time. In the 8 years between Dark Carnival in October Country, Bradbury's writing had advanced dramatically, and it was without question his golden era. So he didn't actually return to Gothic horror after the October Country, with the exception of Something Wicked This Way Comes, which was published in '62. At that point, he had declared that he said all he had to say in the field. But the lasting importance of these books show a master short story writer expounding the boundaries of horror and supernatural fiction. The next book is The Martian Chronicles. Now, this was published by Doubleday in 1950, and it recently sold for $3,250. So, in 1951, The Martian Chronicles was published under a very different title in England called The Silver Locusts. His original title was actually different too. In fact, it didn't even mention Mars. He chose this title in reference to the plague of Earthlings that arrive on Mars in waves, further cementing the idea of humans as invaders and an unwanted blight on the planet. The title was likely changed to stress the role of Mars in the narrative and appeal more directly to fans as a child. But Bradbury became fascinated by the works of Edgar Rice Burroughs, who wrote the John Carter of Mars series in 1912. Bradbury once said, "I know that the Martian Chronicles would never have happened if Burroughs hadn't had an impact on my life at that time. I memorized all of John Carter and Tarzan and sat on my grandparents' front lawn repeating the stories to anyone who would sit and listen." So Bradbury had modeled the epidemic in the book on the actual destructive impact that smallpox had in the Americas during the European colonization of the 17th century. And also, NASA later named the landing site of NASA's Curiosity rover Bradbury Landing after the author. It was dedicated to him, who had just passed away a few months earlier, for his long-standing fascination with the red planet. The next book is The Illustrated Man by Garden City. This was published in 1951, and it recently sold for $2,375. This is a collection of 18 science fiction short stories with a recurring theme throughout: the conflict of the cold mechanics of technology and the psychology of people. It was nominated for the International Fantasy Award in 1952. The author had cited H.G. Wells and Jules Verne as his primary science fiction influences, and he was awarded a Pulitzer citation in 2007. But this book isn't a lesson about technology itself. Rather, it tells us something about how people let it take over and debase their lives. Bradbury brilliantly toys with the dark side, only to give more definition to its opposite. He once said that in his imagination, technology may do troubling things, but rarely evil ones. He's always been in favor of science that can prolong and beautify our lives. He also sums up his recommendations to aspiring writers concerned about the quality of their work. He said, "It doesn't have to be the greatest. It does have to be you." So he had a strong distrust of commercial fiction and constantly fought the science fiction label on his works. He just preferred to be called a fantasist. So ironically, millions of Ballantine paperback reprints in the 70s and 80s proclaimed him world's greatest living science fiction writer, drove him nuts. But his writing grew into an emotionally honest writing style, more dependent on personal reverie and faith in human nature than knowledge of hard science or literary technique. The irony that he spent so much time from the 50s through the 80s writing for the screen, that still goes unexplained. But he was a populist, and when given the opportunity to write for films, he probably felt that it was an opportunity to reach the masses that he thought the label or stigma of science fiction might have prevented him from doing. So the next book is Something Wicked This Way Comes, published by Simon & Schuster in 1962. It recently sold for $1,562.50. So this title is taken from By the Pricking of My Thumbs, Something Wicked This Way Comes. It was the line said by the witches in Macbeth, Act 4, Scene 1. It was believed that pricking one's thumbs was an intuitive feeling or a foreboding, and often alluding to these words. But this novel served as a direct influence on several fantasy and horror authors, including Neil Gaiman, Stephen King, and R.L. Stine. Actually, R.L. Stine once said that Ray Bradbury was his favorite author, and the scariest book he ever read was Something Wicked This Way Comes. But the book originally was written as a screenplay in 1952. After seeing Gene Kelly in Singin' in the Rain, Bradbury thought it was the greatest musical ever made. So he showed Kelly the screenplay, and Kelly was so impressed that he wanted to make it his next picture. The problem was that when Kelly shopped the story around to potential backers, he wasn't able to raise any money for the project. It was only after this failure that Bradbury rewrote the story as a novel and had it published in '62. But he did dedicate the novel to Gene Kelly. A little known fact about Ray Bradbury is that he was actually a descendant of a Salem witch sentenced to hang. Mary Perkins Bradbury was tried and sentenced to hang for being a witch. Back in the day when witchcraft was considered a crime, you had to be very careful about the company that you kept. So her husband actually broke her out of jail and they ran off, but sadly she did die a few years later. So these are the 5 books I thought I would bring to you this week. I'll do another 5 in the next video, but thank you so much for joining me. I really love doing these for you, and again, I really appreciate everybody who subscribed. So for anybody new, subscribe, like, and I will see you on the next video. Thank you.